Imagine this. Your business is a victim of some sort of natural disaster or just some freak accident, something like the California wildfires, a hurricane, or some other destructive thing that destroyed your business. Now, your building may have been covered by property insurance, but the bills keep piling up for the business itself. And you have no way of keeping up revenue to cover those bills that just keep coming. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how to avoid that nightmare with business interruption insurance. So what specifically are you going to learn in this video? Well, number one, you're going to learn about the definition and basics of business interruption insurance. Two is you're going to understand how it works and when it kicks in. And number three is the number one mistake to avoid with business interruption coverage that I'm going to give you at the end of this video as a bonus tip. So in its most basic form, what is business interruption insurance? Well, it sounds just like the name entails, and it specifically covers the loss of income and necessary ongoing expenses when operations are halted due to a covered peril. And covered peril just means any kind of situation in which you would be covered for that specific business interruption insurance, like a fire, natural disasters, or vandalism. And the reason why I specifically say covered peril is because some of them are not covered. For instance, flooding, earthquakes, or mudslide. But if you're in an area that has a high risk for any of those type of perils, then you can get additional coverage for business interruption just in case any one of those perils happen. So let's give you a real life example. Let's say you had a restaurant and one of the pieces of kitchen equipment went on fire and the entire building went under. And during the recovery period and damage reparation, it took you about 2 months and you had to close for those entire 2 months. Well, your building and your property may have been covered. You may have been covered for your equipment, but if you didn't have business interruption insurance, then you would have no income coming in for 2 months to cover things like wages, rent, or lost revenue. So that could cause your employees to leave during that time because they can't afford to wait until you reopen. And it could cause you to be behind on rent. Not to mention your own personal expenses because you rely on the business to cover your own personal life. Obviously, personal expenses are not covered by something like this, but your own savings, you don't want those savings to be dipped into for both your personal expenses and to cover your lost wages or lost rent money for that period of time. Or even worse, have to dip into debt in order to pay for that lost period of time. And a really nice bonus of this is, let's say not only are you going in the negative, but you could still be operating at a profit because let's say you're at a 10 to 15% profit margin. Well, then that lost revenue could actually keep you in profit during that recovery period, which is really nice. And there are certain industries that I would personally say need business interruption insurance more than others. Specifically, any kind of business that has a physical location and the structure is very important to the running of that business. Like retail, restaurants, manufacturing, and a hotel, of course. Again, these businesses rely on the building for their operations, and they have significant overheads like rent or mortgage, equipment leasing, utilities, payroll, among many other things. What are some situations and dangers of these types of different businesses closing down? Well, a restaurant can have kitchen equipment, like in the previous example, go on fire. Or a health code issue can close your restaurant temporarily. A manufacturing facility can have the risk of equipment breaking down that's vital to the operation of the business. They can also experience fires from all the activity that they do or supply chain issues. A hotel is in risk of weather-related closures or structural issues due to earthquakes or floods, which would be additional business interruption insurance coverages. And of course, a retail store, again, could be at risk of fires, could be at risk of weather-related closures, could be at risk of earthquakes, floods, or any other natural disasters. And if you guys need any help with business interruption coverage or just need help with any of your insurance policies on the business side in general, and you need a better broker, then why don't you give us a holler at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol. My name is Alex. I am the owner of the company, and I have written hundreds of business insurance policies of all different types, all different industries, and in all sorts of locations across the United States. So book a call with us again at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol, and we can see how we can help you out. Moving on, let's go into a little bit more detail about what exactly business interruption insurance covers. And I know we went over some of these, like lost revenue during closures, operating expenses like rent, utilities, and payroll. But another really cool thing that it covers is relocation costs, which can help pay for the move, additional rent, and setup costs. This is an incredibly awesome feature for business interruption insurance because what it allows you to do is operate temporarily at a temporary location. So even if there is a limit to how much lost revenue it can cover or how many operating expenses it can cover and for how long the duration is, and let's say it takes you 6 months to get back into the original location, but they don't cover you for that long, well then they'll help you out during that period of time by allowing you to operate in a different area for a temporary period of time. Yes, you may experience some lower revenues because you're not in the same location that people are expecting you to be, but it helps you smooth over that entire process and really never leaves you out in the open or overexposed. I've actually had a client previously, a coffee shop owner, that was able to relocate temporarily to a different location during that period of time where their business was being rebuilt. They unfortunately experienced the fire, and they were obviously very devastated that they had so much damage to their original location that they put so much time and effort into the renovation of. But of course, they were still able to operate when they went into their second location. So, they were very thankful for that. And I kind of pushed them on that business interruption coverage. Costed them a little bit more money on their insurance premiums, but I'm sure they were extremely happy that they had it when the situation happened. And that's a lot of insurance cases. A lot of people think that they're paying for no reason. It's very comparable to how people feel about paying for Social Security when they feel like they're not going to get it for a long period of time. When the time comes for you to need that service, you'll be happy that you paid for it. And here are some things that it doesn't cover. Number one is undocumented income. So this is obviously cash basis income that's unreported. You're gonna find this a lot with people that run barbershops or any kind of businesses that try to incentivize people to pay with cash in order for them to avoid paying sales tax and kind of do certain shady things. But of course, any kind of undocumented income is not going to be covered because obviously there is no proof that you were able to receive this income. So obviously when people do this, they're trying to avoid paying taxes. I get it, fine, but when you have a situation like this, you'll probably wish that you did show a little bit more income than you did. Number two is any kind of damage that was not caused by the event. So let's say that you were operating a restaurant and you had a fire that was local to only one part of your restaurant. Let's say mainly a portion of the kitchen. Well, if you've had damage to the tiles in the bathroom, for example, then this is not going to cover that damage. You're going to have to pay out of pocket for that because it was not associated with the event itself. And number three is pandemics. So in the case of something like COVID, and I'm sure many of you business owners that have had businesses during that period of time, you wouldn't be covered. But in some cases, there are insurance carriers that allow you to add a specific endorsement to cover you in the case of a pandemic. They just don't want to be universally responsible for a pandemic because if a pandemic happens, then every business nationwide has to close down. And it would honestly be impossible for an insurance company to operate in that scenario. And then premiums would have to rise so much that they're going to be too expensive for people to pay reasonably. So that would not be covered under a basic business interruption insurance coverage. And a really nice practical tip that I want to give you guys is to review your policy carefully to understand exactly what's included and consider adding riders or additional endorsements for any kind of additional coverages that you need. And like I mentioned before, people that are in flood zones like Florida or Long Island and New York, you're going to want to get that additional endorsement to make sure that you're covered for floods. And if you're in California, for instance, then you're more likely to experience an earthquake. You're probably going to want to have that as an additional endorsement as well. And here's a really awesome golden nugget for you guys that have watched so far. And this is how to calculate adequate coverage for your business interruption insurance. So number one, you're going to want to assess your monthly revenue. Number two is you're going to want to assess your fixed expenses, so you itemize your monthly overhead. Number three is you're going to want to have estimated recovery time after a disaster. So here's a nice little rough formula for you guys. You'll do average monthly revenue plus monthly overhead times the number of months needed equals approximate coverage. So you want to think about this in the worst case scenario. If, God forbid, the entire building goes on fire and you lose everything, how long would it take you to have everything back up and running? And if that policy would be way too expensive for you, that you want to have at least a certain portion of it, and you want to make sure that you have the additional endorsement to cover you for temporary relocation. And that way you're minimizing your premiums while also making sure that you're covered in the absolute worst case scenario. So here's a quick recap of everything that you've learned so far about business interruption insurance from this video. Number one is it covers lost revenue, expenses, and relocation costs. Number two is it's essential for high overhead or physical location businesses, like we mentioned before, and that's retail, that's restaurants, manufacturing, or hotels. And number three is you have to remember what's excluded. That would be anything like earthquakes, floods, pandemics, undocumented income, and damage to the business from unrelated events. And number four, and this is probably the most important thing you've learned in this video, and that's calculating the coverage by revenue, expenses, and recovery time that you would need for your business interruption. And again, you're going to want to calculate the worst case scenario and work your way down from there if the premium is too high. Finally, here is the bonus tip that you've been waiting for. Number one is keeping detailed financial records. Number two is maintaining up-to-date books and also maintenance record of equipment, values of your equipment, values of any of your vehicles, because missing documentation can cause lengthy delays in receiving payouts or reduce them entirely, and that makes sense. If you aren't keeping records of the equipment that you purchased, and let's say you purchased a very expensive piece of equipment, cash, and you don't have a record of that receipt, well then they're not going to know, especially if the entire building is destroyed, that you had that equipment in the first place, or the value of that equipment. So make sure that you keep things organized. And again, if you need any help with your business interruption coverage or any insurance for your business for that matter, then why don't you contact us at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol. You can book a call with myself there, and let's see what we can do for your business.